Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today's guest is an actor, musician, and writer who's been entertaining the world since he was 5 years old. In fact, he was by far the most successful, recognizable, and popular child star in the 60s and 70s. He appeared in dozens of TV shows, including The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, Bewitched, The Twilight Zone, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, The Fugitive, and many more. But he's best remembered for playing Will Robinson on the iconic classic TV series Lost in Space, which holds a permanent place in pop culture history. He starred in 4 Disney movies and appeared in many other films, including A Child is Waiting, Dear Brigitte, Palm Springs Weekend, and Bless the Beasts and Children. In fact, and this is really jaw-dropping, this man worked with more legendary superstars by the time he hit puberty than most A-list actors ever do in their entire lives. He worked with everyone from Red Skelton, Loretta Young, Franchot Tone, June Allyson, to Bob Hope, Lucille Ball, Judy Garland, Gene Kelly, Jackie Gleason, and yes, even Brigitte Bardot. And get this, in a highly publicized interview, Jimmy Stewart said that our guest was the only child actor he'd ever worked with who was worth a damn. What a compliment. As an adult, he's appeared in many movies like Papillon, Sunshine, The Twilight Zone movie, Double Trouble, Hard to Hold, and the first Captain America feature film. And on TV, he's appeared in The Rockford Files, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, The Adventures of Superboy, Matlock, Diagnosis Murder, and he played Lenier for 5 seasons on Babylon 5. And of course, every Lost in Space fan was overjoyed to see him appear as the real Dr. Smith in the 2018 Netflix reboot of Lost in Space. Throughout his life, he's been a highly accomplished and popular musician, both as a solo artist and as a member of several bands, including Redwood, The Generators, Action Skulls, and Barnes and Barnes, whose song Fish Heads became a worldwide hit. He's released over a dozen albums, and he wrote 105 songs for the TV show Adventures in Wonderland and got an Emmy nomination for Outstanding Achievement in Music Direction and Composition. There is truly nothing this man can't do. Besides being an actor and musician, he's had a prolific voiceover career, and he narrated over 50 episodes of A&E Biography. He was even the voice of Farmers Insurance for 11 years. He's created and written numerous comic books, screenplays, and novels, and for 4 years, he produced, wrote, and hosted his own weekly radio show. And now, finally, he's released his highly anticipated memoir entitled Danger, Will Robinson, The Full Mumy, a Memoir, which gives us a very insightful, honest, and entertaining look not only at his multifaceted career, but more importantly, we get to know him as a son, grandson, husband, father, grandfather, and human being. I'm delighted to welcome Bill Mumy to our show. Bill, thank you so much for being here.
Wow, Harvey, I don't know how to follow that. That was a very impressive introduction. Thank you kindly for those words.
Well, Bill, it's my pleasure. I must tell you that as someone who feels like he grew up with you, because I watched everything you did on TV, I found your book fascinating because you've grown up to be so much more than the child we thought we knew. For example, I had no idea that for you, even from an early age, you preferred to be seen first and foremost as a serious musician who also happened to be a working actor. That must have been quite a challenge given your high public profile as an actor.
Yes, that did prove to be a challenge. But after the age of 10, that's when I first started playing the guitar. Obviously, I had already spent half of my life in a pretty prolific on-camera career. And I think the world in general tends to keep people framed, or celebrities, whatever, artists framed in their initial introduction to them. So it's been a blessing and a curse. I think in a way it's held back some of my success as a solo musician, but on the other hand, it's opened a lot of doors, and I've continued to be blessed with the opportunity to live kind of an uncompromisingly artistic life in a comfortable manner. So I'm grateful for it all.
One of the great things about your book, Bill, is the way you've helped us get to know your parents. Your dad, Charlie, owned a restaurant in Hollywood, and your mom, Muriel, was a secretary at 20th Century Fox. And they were absolutely not the typical aggressive, pushy stage parents. In fact, it was you at the age of 4 years old who pushed them to let you become an actor. How did you know you wanted to be on television at such a young age?
Well, I guess you can't escape your destiny. And I broke my leg when I was 4 years old playing Zorro. And I couldn't go around and run around and play with my neighborhood friends for, I think it was about 10 or 11 weeks. It was a pretty big break. I was in a big cast. And so all I did was sit around and watch television every day. I watched the Mickey Mouse Club every day, and there was Zorro, and there was Spin and Marty. I watched Superman, reruns of Superman with George Reeves, and something about those caped adventurers, Zorro and Superman, it just called to me in a really primal way. And I said to my folks, I've got to get inside the TV and do that. So to get into that acting thing, my mother, who had spent 11 years at 20th Century Fox as a writer's secretary, wasn't afraid of show business, wasn't impressed with show business. She put me on a television show that civilian kids could go on, which was called Romper Room, and it was in different variations all over the country. It was like a little nursery school television show. But her point in doing that, which I look back on and agree was smart, she wanted to see how I'd behave on a set with lights and cameras and, okay, quiet, we're on a bell, and I thrived there. I really liked it. I enjoyed it. I stayed there for a couple of weeks. Most kids came and went within a week, and I stayed for a couple of weeks. So then we got an agent, and then it all just started happening real quick and continued to for a long time.
That's for sure. Your first starring role was in an episode of the Loretta Young show called My Own Master, and you were only 6 years old. How were you able to memorize lines before you could even read?
It was really easy. And I think everybody has gifts, and that was certainly a gift that I have. If I speak something out loud and I tell myself I should remember it, or if I hear it out loud and I tell myself I need to remember it, I was always able to learn scripts within like an hour. I would know the whole script. And because I couldn't read in those days, I would memorize everybody's lines. I used to tell Cloris Leachman or other people I worked with, we would be shooting or we would be rehearsing, and they'd go up, they wouldn't remember their line. And before the script supervisor could help them, I'd tell them what their line was because I knew the whole script.
What an amazing gift. You starred in 3 of the most iconic episodes of The Twilight Zone, called Long Distance Call, It's a Good Life, and In Praise of Pip. My favorite episode was Long Distance Call. Is it true that your mom almost stopped you from being in that show?
That is true. And I'm very grateful that she didn't. The theme of that episode is, a boy, a 5-year-old boy gets a toy telephone from his grandmother. She then passes away and starts communicating with him on this toy telephone and tries to lure him into the realm of death with her, tries to get him to kill himself. Well, there were several bits in that script where the boy, whose name was Billy, indeed does try to kill himself, runs out into traffic. I think runs out into traffic twice, and then tries to drown himself in a pond. And my mother was a little recalcitrant about accepting it because she, for some reason, thought, well, what if this puts ideas in his head? Like, if he doesn't get his way, he's going to go run into the street, or if he, jump into the pond. That was her thought. And quite happily, she said, oh, no, he knows how to act. He knows what's reality and what's pretend. And she was right. And it worked out fine.
You wrote that of all the roles you played as a child, besides Will Robinson, you're most proud of playing Anthony in It's a Good Life on The Twilight Zone. Why?
Well, I always, my goal was to be like a superhero, like a Superman or a Zorro. And in essence, Anthony Fremont was like the most powerful mutant that ever existed. I mean, he controlled reality. He read everyone's thoughts. If he didn't like those thoughts, he could change matter any way he wanted to. I mean, he was really super powerful. So I loved him for that. And it's become such an iconic television classic show, and the performances were just top notch. I mean, Cloris and John Larch, and I mean, everyone in that cast turned in a stellar performance. The director, James Sheldon, I worked with several times. He was a pleasure to work with, and it has stood the test of time so impressively that that guy has stuck with me. I still wish people into the cornfield if I get cranky.
In the 2003 Twilight Zone reboot, you got to play Anthony again as an adult, reunited with Cloris Leachman and co starring your own daughter, Liliana. That must have been an amazing experience.
It was perfect, and it was the cherry on top of my show business Sunday. If if I had never done another thing after that, that was still an ultimate gift. I was offered the opportunity to return to that character after 40 years. And I was a little like, wow, do we want to mess with this? Would Rod Serling approve of this? But then I read the script, the first draft of the script, and I thought, yeah, I think Rod Serling would approve of this. And the producer who wrote it, Ira Stephen Bear, said this would be great for Liliana. What could be better than to return to an iconic character with my own daughter at my side, who delivered such a fantastic performance, and even better to work with Cloris again, who was always a gift to any actor who had the opportunity to work alongside her, because she wouldn't accept anything except your best, and she knew how to help you find your best. I loved Cloris. She was a wonderful talent and a one of a kind.
That's for sure. And I got to tell you, I really loved that episode. I think Rod Serling would be so happy with that. Now, in addition to The Twilight Zone, you also starred in 3 episodes of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. And one of those episodes, called Bang, You're Dead, was directed by Hitchcock himself, who you described in your book as a sadistic jerk because he traumatized you on the set. Would you mind telling that story?
Okay, here we go. Bang, you're dead. I'm 7 years old. I'm in every scene. It's an excellent television show, and it points out the danger of guns in the hands of children. There are child labor laws. You can only work a minor like nine, I guess, depending on how long a lunch you give him, 9.5 hours a day. I'm 7 years old. I'm in every scene, and I've been working really hard and turning in a very fine performance. You know, there was nothing wrong with what I was doing. I wasn't doing anything wrong. But the welfare worker let the first assistant director know that they were going to lose me in 5 minutes. You're losing Billy in 5 minutes. Nobody goofed around with that. That if the time was up, the kid was wrapped out. That's just the way it was. Well, they wanted to shoot one more close up of me before they wrapped me out. Fine, right? So they suggested that I stay on set as the stand in for myself while they lit this last close up. Fine, no problem from me standing in for myself. I'm 7 years old. I've been working 9 hours. They're trying to light me, and I'm fiddling around. I'm fiddling around because I'm not a trained stand-in. I'm an actor, and I'm 7 years old, right? And I was just fiddling around. I wasn't standing still. So Alfred Hitchcock, his black suit, his tight tie, his jowls hanging down, he was constantly sweating, a very imposing presence to a little kid. He gets up out of his director's chair and he walks up to me and he bends down so that no one can hear him but me. And he says to me, if you don't stop moving about, I'm going to get a nail and I'm going to nail your feet to your mark, and the blood will come pouring out like milk. So stop moving. Now, that's exactly what he said to me, and that's how he said it. And it kind of blew my mind. It was a very visual threat that he was going to nail my feet to the floor. Now, I, at 7 years old, certainly didn't expect anybody that they would really nail my feet to the floor. But this was Alfred Hitchcock, and he really scared the heck out of me by saying that to me. So that's the story. And as we were wrapping out, I told my mother, I said, he was going to nail my feet. And my mother saw that I was all upset. And she goes, "Oh, honey, he's British. They have a different sense of humor. Just forget it." Now, here's the thing. I worked at Universal after that, well after he died, Alfred Hitchcock died. But during the entire time that I was coming and going at Universal, including a television series I did there in the 70s called Sunshine, and he was there, and I was there every day, I never wanted to see him again. I never wanted to walk past his office, which was right on the main drive of the Universal lot. I always went all the way around a soundstage or a wardrobe department, left or right, depending which way, to avoid walking past his office and potentially having to confront him or talk to him or see him or anything. And if he had only said to me, "Thank you, Billy. I was only kidding, you know. I wasn't really going to nail your feet to the floor." If he had said that to me, I probably wouldn't even have remembered it. But I know for a fact that he enjoyed scaring this little boy who was carrying his show and doing a great job. And that's the part of him that I just can't forgive. But it's certainly one of the very few negative experiences that I had as a child with an adult who is a very respected, iconic character.
Well, I want to ask you about another respected iconic character. In 1962, you appeared in a movie with Judy Garland and Burt Lancaster called A Child is Waiting. I know you were only 8 years old, but did you get any sense of the emotional turmoil that Judy Garland was going through at that time?
Oh, I did. I very much did, and I go into detail about that film in my book. That was a very difficult film. We'd get on the set, and then we would wait, and we would unfortunately be told, "Well, Miss Garland's not coming out of her trailer." So then we would be taken back, and then maybe she would come out, and then we'd all rush back, and then maybe she was up to shooting a scene, and maybe she wasn't. And it was a very unpleasant set. And Judy Garland, whenever I was with her, which was, quite a bit for a few weeks, she was so sensitive and she was so vulnerable and she was so sweet and so loving, especially the kids, all of us, whether we had been working for 3 years or whether we were not able to, speak. She was sensitive and vulnerable and wonderful, but boy was she damaged and boy was she sad. And she just radiated this deep sadness, and I never forgot that.
Wow. When Butch Patrick was on our show last year, he told me that the part of Eddie Munster was originally offered to you. Why did you turn it down?
I didn't want to do it. And my parents didn't want to do it. My agent didn't want to do it. It just didn't seem like a good fit. Nobody particularly liked the idea of the makeup transformation. I didn't really want to be a little wolf boy. It just didn't feel like the right, I was doing so much work in different versatile projects. I would go from a Disney movie to a Western to a cop show to The Fugitive to Ozzie and Harriet to the movie with Jimmy Stewart. I mean, I was working absolutely as much as I could or wanted to work in all these various great roles. And it just didn't seem like a good fit. So we appreciated the offer, and we just said no, thank you. And here's the thing: I guest starred in an episode of The Munsters. It was fine. Butch did a great job as Eddie Munster. He still honors that series and that character. He and I are good friends. I mean, we talk often. And if I had said yes to Eddie Munster, I would not have been able to have been Will Robinson on Lost in Space. And being Will Robinson on Lost in Space was everything I ever wanted to do. He was a superhero. He had the superhero wardrobe. He had a ray gun and he used it. He could fly the ship. He could program the robot. He got Dr. Smith out of trouble every week. And Will basically, honestly, saved the day probably 80% of the time. He was everything I ever wanted to be. I loved every second of working on Lost in Space as Will Robinson. And if I'd been Eddie Munster, that wouldn't have been something.
Which is exactly why you said you cannot escape your destiny. But for the sake of our viewers, if you want to see little Billy Mumy in The Munsters, he played Eddie Munster's friend Googie.
Googie. I think the episode.
You know that I'm absolutely obsessed with your career, so of course I would know that. You wrote that the best acting training you got as a child was from writer-director Norman Tokar, who simply told you right before the camera started rolling to think. How did that one word help you?
It settled me down. It focused me. I always knew my dialogue. I always knew what we were going to do. We'd rehearse something. I knew I'd go from here to here. I say this, I say that. But he helped me calm down. I was 8. I was always zippy. And Norman had directed almost 100 episodes of Leave It to Beaver. He was very, very capable of working with children, child actors. He was just a great, talented guy, but a very short man, very nice, easygoing guy. And he used to just come over. Everything would be set. And we might even have been rolling. And he would just sit down, put his hands on my shoulder and say, think. Okay. And action. And it just was a nice focusing thing. And I know that people spend decades studying Stanislavski or whatever it might be, but Norman Tokar's think system worked fine for me.
Now, of course, you mentioned Lost in Space. No interview with you, Bill, would be complete without asking you about Lost in Space. One of the things that became very clear by the second season was that you had far more scenes with Dr. Smith than you ever had with Guy Williams, who played your father. Why?
Well, I mean, that's a Pandora's box of a question. Let me first say that, if not for Guy, I might never have become an actor, because it was watching Guy as Zorro and playing Guy as Zorro, breaking my leg doing that was the catalyst for all of this. So when we started shooting and Guy was my dad, that was a very, very special, important, and positive experience for me. And Guy was great. He was everything you would want him to be. He was super smart, very intelligent, funny, and a physical, magnificent specimen of manhood. He was great. And I love the father and son scenes that we do have in those episodes. We shot the pilot without the character of Dr. Smith or the robot. Those two characters were added after the series was picked up by CBS. It was the network who suggested, hey, let's have a robot. That would be good. And we can merchandise it. And let's family every week against the heat and the cold and the this and the that. Let's have a bad guy in there. Everybody's so likable. Let's put a bad guy in there. Another great idea, a great idea. But they brought Jonathan Harris in as the series started. We'd already finished the pilot, and that pilot was chopped up into bits and pieces of the first 5 Lost in Space episodes. So Jonathan was brought in, And within 2 months of the show airing, it was a genuine success. But it was on at 7 o'clock, and that was the CBS Family Hour. And the network started getting an impressive amount of letters from parents saying, this show is scaring our children. And if you look at the original episodes of Lost in Space, it's very much an adventure series. It's beautifully shot in black and white, looks like a classic Universal horror movie. I mean, the score by John Williams is so dramatic. I mean, he got pretty much his start in television working on Lost in Space. The score moves it along, and it's dramatic, and the effects for the time were great. I mean, the Jupiter 2 looked great. The Chariot looked great and was functional. The robot was a great prop designed by Bob Kinoshita, who also had designed Robbie the Robot from Forbidden Planet. But the truth of the matter is, Irwin Allen's original vision for Lost in Space was a dark adventure sci-fi show. Well, the mandate from the network was, it's too scary for the little kids at the hour we're airing it, lighten it up. Jonathan, who I adore just loved him with all my heart, and we were very, very close. Jonathan, from the beginning, knew that by playing a saboteur who was actually willing to murder children, and I mean, the original Zachary Smith, Colonel Zachary Smith, was a real bad guy, a real villain. And Jonathan always said, they're going to kill me off after 6 episodes. This guy can't last like this. You know, he's just too dark. So at the same time that the network said, it's too scary, lighten it up, Jonathan was kind of given the okay from Irwin Allen to start camping it up, to raise the comedy level, and to turn Dr. Smith from this scary, formidable, potential murderer, saboteur, into this alliterative, insulting, scaredy cat, selfish guy that we love to hate. And as those two things happened, our ratings got better and the show changed. And there was a lot more of me and Smith and the robot as that trio than there was of, you know, Guy and June and Mark or something, as they had originally envisioned it to be. It was not an unpleasant set, but there certainly was recognition that the show changed dramatically in terms of its tone and the path that it followed. The first season, I prefer the black and white, the more serious ensemble episodes. The second season was so camp. So the colors, we went to color and everything was pop art. It was that brief period in the mid 60s. It was such a cultural change globally everywhere. I mean, the Beatles had gone from I Want to Hold Your Hand to Sergeant Pepper. It was a very, very fast changing time. And then the third season was kind of a melding and a compromise. It was like, okay, we'll get back to more of the other people and we'll try to get it a little less silly. Some of them were still ridiculously silly and some of them were more sci-fi oriented. But Star Trek was the same way. One episode they're walking around with tribbles on their heads or dancing with a green lady, and the next episode maybe they're going back in time to Earth or something with like a great Harlan Ellison episode. But both of those shows had their own campy, silly times, and anyway, just happened that way.
How does it make you feel to know that so many people were inspired to pursue careers in the space program because of Lost in Space?
It's a great, flattering feeling, and I have been on the receiving end of a lot of that from Lost in Space over my life. I have been invited to space shuttle launches. I have been in space shuttles, not in space, but I've been inside them. I've been sitting with astronauts, and it's many, many, many people have told me that it was either the series in general, or it was my particular role as Will Robinson that was a gateway for them, or a catalyst, inspiration for them to go into the sciences. And, that's a good thing. That means, I guess, we did something good.
Oh, that would be an understatement. In 1998, there was a TV special called Lost in Space Forever. And you, Bill, you wrote the scene that reunited Will Robinson with Dr. Smith and the robot after 30 years. That must have been such an emotional experience for you.
It was such a joy. Oh, I can't tell you. I can't tell you how happy that made me and Jonathan and Bobby and Dick Tufeld. John Larroquette had been hosting this special, which was flashbacks and cuts from old scenes, old episodes, on a rebuilt Jupiter 2 set, the upper deck of the Jupiter 2. They had really taken the blueprints and done a good job. They duplicated the old set. And so I was given the opportunity to write the bit, I don't know, 6 or 7 pages, no big thing, where, due to a technical sci-fi little goof thing, Larroquette beeps out and Dr. Smith, Will Robinson, and the robot appear on the Jupiter 2. And we were in wardrobe. They created new wardrobe that was, duplicates of the 3rd season wardrobe. And it was just so much fun. But my God, I tell you, Jonathan and I fell back into that like putting on a beloved Levi jacket. It was just immediately easy and fun. And we jammed, and oh my God, Jonathan laughed. He had so much fun. It was a beautiful day, and I loved it. And the fans loved it. And man, I cherished that. That was just a gift.
It sure was, and all of the fans cherish it too. Now, Bill, I want to take a moment and mention the wonderful book that you co-authored with Angela Cartwright, which was recently revised, called Lost and Found in Space 2, Blast Off into the Expanded Edition. I want to ask you, for people who already have the first edition, what's different about the second edition?
In a way, we should have just called it a totally different thing. It's like 250 pages more. There's hundreds of more photographs, and I can't even begin to tell you how much more stories there was. The first edition of the book was really more or less the opportunity to share these never before seen photos of the series that we had access to, and some of our recollections and personal memories of the show. But when we had the opportunity to revisit it with countless new proof sheets that we were given access to that nobody even knew existed, it was both of our idea. It was also the very beginning of the lockdown, and we had a lot of time. And so we really went deep into our own personal feelings, which I think we had kept a little guarded in the original version. We didn't get that deep into the personal stuff, but in Blast Off, we certainly share the deeper stuff.
Well, every Lost in Space fan who does not have that book needs to get it. It's fabulous. Now, Bill, as you know, a lot of iconic actresses played your on-screen mother when you were a kid, including Cloris Leachman, Shirley Jones, Glynis Johns, and of course, June Lockhart. Do you have a favorite TV mom?
I loved working with June. It has to be June because, we spent over 3 years together. June was very connected to Angela and I. She made sure that our minds were really engaged when we weren't in school. If we were on break or we were done with our school, she'd sit us down and play password. We played a lot of Scrabble. She kept us engaged. She took us to rock concerts. So, June, yeah, I'll say June. As an actor, I loved working with Cloris every time I had to, because I can't think of a better actress or actor than Cloris. And she always managed, like I said earlier, to bring you up to pretty much as high as you could get in a performance. So that Cloris for that reason. And boy, was I in love with Shirley. Shirley, I had the biggest crush on Shirley. I fell madly in love with her. And to this day, Shirley is a good friend of mine. I speak to Sean, her son, Sean Cassidy, is one of my very best friends. I talk to him almost every day. But Shirley and I speak maybe 4 times a year. And she called me very recently to say she was watching the Twilight Zone, It's a Good Life with Cloris. And she was going out of her way to tell me how scary I was and how good I was in that. I just love Shirley. So those three gals, it's hard to like pick a number one.
I adore Shirley Jones. Please say hi to Sean for me. Another person that I have to ask you about, Jimmy Stewart. You wrote that James Stewart made a huge impression on you when you made a movie together. I was going to ask you what the most important thing was that you learned from him, but I'm going to guess he taught you how to behave on the set as an actor and as a human being.
Jimmy Stewart was the best of the best in every way. He showed me by example how the very best treats everyone. There was never any affectation from him. There was never any I'm the star kind of vibe from him towards anyone. He understood that, like an orchestra, the crew and the cast, everyone grooves together. No one's really more important. He might have a 4-page monologue to deliver, but if the boom came into the frame or if somebody didn't hit the mark of the camera, I mean, everybody has to play together. It's a big orchestra and nobody's more important than anyone else. And he certainly never lost his temper, ever, never lost his cool. We spent about 11 weeks together as father and son. And I think during those 11 weeks, we probably played 11 weeks of baseball. I mean, in between scenes, we tossed the ball around and talked about sports and talked. I had a great relationship with my father, and my father and my mother both came to France on location for that film, and both went to Sausalito in Northern California on location on that film. My family was with me, but the father son bonding that happened with me and Mr. Stewart was special. And obviously, I'm sure he did it for two reasons. I think he did it just because he was a great guy, and I think he did it because he felt it would benefit the film the closer we were. He was a great actor. He really showed me, not that I hadn't seen it before, but I mean, it's one thing to work 3 or 4 days on a Twilight Zone or something. It's another thing to work 10 or 11 weeks with somebody every day. It's just a different experience. And I watched how he listened to everybody when the cameras were rolling. I mean, he helped me focus on the fact that, yeah, I can believe what I'm saying when I say it, and I can hit my mark without looking at it. But am I really listening to everybody else? Or am I just waiting to say my line that I've memorized and I'm about to deliver? And he bumped up my game in terms of my characters listening. And he was just so nice. He was just great, a great man, a really great man.
So, Bill, what goes through your mind when you watch yourself on TV as a kid?
Oh, uh, I don't do it very often, but I do it. You know, I have a DVR uh, thing that is programmed to record the name. So every once in a while, I'll check it and like, oh, look, there's a Perry Mason I did. Haven't seen that in a long time. You want to watch it? I'll say to my wife Eileen, she'll like go, oh, all right. It's fun when you don't remember what's going to happen, really. You know, it's fun to see those old shows because there were so many great character actors cast on television in those days. And, you know, the scores are so different from today. And it's a time machine, and it's fun to be a part of it yourself and see it. It's interesting because when I watch an episode of something that's from my youth, my mind remembers stuff that was happening when we weren't shooting. My mind remembers, oh yeah, that guy, he gave me the Purple People Eater single. I guess the weird little things that I'll remember, but I tend to remember the stuff that was going on more so than the stuff that I'm looking at it as an actor. But I very rarely cringe at watching Billy Mumy. I look at Billy Mumy's work and I go, I believe that. That's I think that's the most important thing that I can say objectively is when I watch me on a show that I believe him, that he believed what he was saying at the time. And that's a big deal,
Oh,
because you can see people who don't, and I don't see that too often in my old work.
in 1971, you co starred in a great movie, Bless the Beasts and Children, directed by Stanley Kramer. After that movie, you decided to step away from the camera and focus on your music career. Why?
One reason was all I had known since the age of 5 was working as an actor. In 1971, I was in what I felt and still feel was a really good trio, was a really good band. And we gigged 100 times in 1971. That's a lot. We were performing a lot. We were recording at Record Plant. We had some good management, and I felt like this was the path I wanted to give 100% to without having to stop and I'll be back in 12 weeks. I'm doing a Disney movie or whatever. I said, okay, let's give this 100%. And also it was very important to the band, which was called Redwood, that Billy Mumy wasn't exploited as part of that. We never were billed as, Redwood featuring Billy Mumy from Lost in Space. That was an absolute choice that the three of us made equally. It wasn't something that they said we don't want. It was something none of us wanted. We wanted to be Redwood, and we didn't want to carry the baggage of TV Boy with us. And Redwood did not become Crosby, Stills, and Nash. So after about 2 years, I went back into, but I really gave it, I can't say that the band didn't get its shot that it deserved. It did, and we didn't become, some 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 big band, but it worked out okay.
Now, in 1973, you got to work with Dustin Hoffman and Steve McQueen in Papillon. I know that The Graduate is your favorite movie of all time. So it must have been amazing to work with one of your idols, Dustin Hoffman, although you wrote that Papillon was a very troubled production.
That the story of Papillon opens my book, and I almost don't really want to kind of give away too much about that. It was a very troubled production. It was a very difficult project. Dustin was great, and I recounted in the book some really interesting stories, and that was a big wow. That was a big wow with a big whoa attached to it. It was like whoa, wow, whoa. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say about it.
Well, people, I read the book. You should read it. That chapter alone is worth 10 times the price of the book. Now,
right? I mean, seriously.
oh, yeah. Now,
Right?
for 5 seasons in the 90s, you played Lenier in Babylon 5. And by that time, you were a writer as well as an actor. Did you contribute to the storyline for that character?
Yeah, Babylon 5 came along in 1993 and lasted 110 episodes or so till 1998. And I was in all of those seasons as Lanier, an alien from the planet Minbar, who had a very serious arc. And it was a very well written show, and it was a very physically difficult thing for me. I never acclimated to that makeup, that glue and the foam rubber and all the stuff that I had to go through every day to physically become the character. I liked the character very much. And yes, I did contribute the main story of his arc.
Well, can I tell you something? I have to say that when June Lockhart guest starred on an episode of Babylon 5, I think it was season 1, I was
Yeah.
shocked. I was absolutely shocked that you had no scenes together. How could the writers have missed such a golden opportunity to put the two of you back together in outer space?
Well, I'll tell you now. I'll tell you how that happened. It was, I believe, the episode is called "Quality of Mercy." It was the first season. June was there doing a guest shot, and although the characters did not have a scene together in the script, what we were all planning to do was there, it's a big space station, and there's always these hallway shots where people are traveling from one place to another. And we had all planned, production and everybody had all planned that there was going to be a scene where she's walking down the hallway and Lanier is walking down the hallway in the other direction, and they pass each other. And then they both stop and go on. It would have been a nice little bit. But while we were shooting that episode, we had the huge Northridge earthquake, which was terrifying. And the aftershocks of that earthquake were seriously shaking the factory that we filmed Babylon 5 in. It used to be a hot tub factory. It was isolated out in Sun Valley. It was not on a giant concrete bunker stage like at 20th Century Fox or Universal or anything. It wasn't anything like a soundstage. Anyway, we were going to do the little walk and turn and schmooze thing with June, and the earthquake made everything like, okay, let's get this done. Let's get this done. A lot of people weren't coming in, but it was scary. It was really scary. That was a really big earthquake. That's why we didn't have the June Lockhart, Billy Mumy moment.
What a missed opportunity. Turning now to your music career, I have to mention the fact that Fish Heads was not only a worldwide hit, but the video, which Bill Paxton directed and starred in, and which aired on Saturday Night Live, was named the #1 novelty video of all time by MTV. And it was named by Rolling Stone as the 57th greatest rock video of all time. But my question, Bill, is this. Whose idea was it to sing the chorus in the chipmunk style?
Mine. It was my idea. Robert Hamer, my late partner in Barnes and Barnes, came up with the fish head chorus after a Chinese meal where he had been served a fish with the head on that was just staring at him, and it was disturbing to him. And he wrote the chorus, the hook, and then he brought that to me, and I wrote all the verse lyrics. And we only had a 4-track studio. That was 1978. We had a little 4-track studio in my house, and we recorded that. And when we got to the chorus, about production, I said, "Oh, let's do it like the Chipmunks." And he didn't want to do it. He said, "Oh, come on, the Chipmunks, that's old-fashioned stuff. We don't need to do that." I said, "Look, let's just try it, okay? Let's try doing the choruses in Chipmunk vocals." And, after a bit of I don't want to, and we did. And of course, that was a button for the hook. And then it just took off. It's fun. It's like you never know. You can write the greatest rock and roll song or the greatest folk song or a beautiful ballad that comes from the heart. And yet Fish Heads becomes this worldwide hit. And you're kind of now, which I love. I mean, how can you not love Fish Heads? But at the same time, it's like, wow, I'm going to be lost in space, Babylon 5, Fish Head guy.
Well, there's something very amazing. Personally, I find this really special about you. In 1968, when you were filming Rascal, you were only 14 years old. You were offered a record deal by Disney on their Buena Vista label. You turned it down because you saw that you would have no control over the songs or the arrangements or the production. Do you get how amazing that is, that at that age you understood what you wanted to deliver as an artist and that you were not going to let yourself be controlled? Do you get that?
musical integrity has always been incredibly important to me. I'm okay doing a stupid part. I'm okay doing a foolish part. I'm okay doing a scary part. I won't do an exploitative, violent that. I mean, I'm not going to, do that. But acting wise, it's like, sure, I'm your chess piece. Go ahead, move me around. I'll do what you want me to do. But when it comes to music, it's always been since I started. It just, I practiced, I worked really hard to play good. I mean, I took lessons for 4 years. Nobody pushed me, I pushed myself. And then I started writing songs when I was young. And some of those songs are still okay. They're not, some of them were just silly, but some of those songs around 1968, when I was doing that film, they're not that bad. They were pretty good. They were okay. And I envisioned, it was like, wow, I can get a record deal. Okay, well, I've got these like 4 good ones. Can we record those? And can I help to decide what other stuff we might record? And they were very clear. I don't disrespect them. They were like, no, look, we know how to make records. You want to be Annette or you want to be Cubby, or I mean, I don't know what they didn't go into that, but they just said absolutely not. We'll make a record, we'll get you in there, you'll sing it, and you'll do what we tell you. And I realized exactly what that would mean, and it meant no, no, I don't regret that. And I suppose I get it. Yeah, I guess I get it. But that's just who I am. That's who I've always been.
Well, the reason I asked you that question is because I'm very impressed with you as a kid, with your integrity and with your independent spirit, and in reading your book and now talking with you today, it's obvious, Bill, that although you did your share of partying as a young man, you never got deeply into heavy drugs or blew all your money like so many other former child stars. How do you account for the emotional stability and the maturity in the way you've lived your life?
Oh, well, I don't know about maturity.
Look
there's a lot of
around. Look
there's
around
a
at the former child stars. I could name them for you. Yes, there's enormous stability and there's enormous maturity. And the
well,
fact that you're still here in such great shape says that in volumes.
well, thank you. I you know, I never got in trouble, but I certainly could have gotten in trouble, if you know what I mean. I was lucky. I was a young musician in Hollywood and LA in the 70s. There was a lot of stuff going on around me. I wasn't blind to it, and I wasn't necessarily never partaking in any of it, but I've always been somewhat cautious. I never wanted to lose my mind. And financially speaking, my dad was an excellent example. He was a real cowboy kind of guy. And he would say to me, if you want something really badly and you can afford it, go ahead. But if you can't afford it, don't buy it. Get yourself something else that'll do, or wait till you can afford that one. My dad never lived on credit in any way, and neither have I. I don't know anybody a dime ever. I mean, with the exception of when I first bought my house, which has been paid for 20 years now. But I've never bought anything that I charged, that you know what I mean? It's an excellent lesson. And I've never been rich compared to people I know who are rich, but I've never been poor. And I'm grateful to my wife, Eileen, because she's very good about us not being too extravagant. And, I've lived in the same house for 47 years. I mean, when I say that, it's kind of a shock, but it's true. There were many times when, I was tempted, oh, let's get a bigger house with a bigger yard and a bigger fence and a this and that. And then I always said to myself, hey, Matt, this house is okay. And it's like very easy to live here. You bought it a long time ago. So I haven't put myself into an uncomfortable position financially where I was stressed out. And I've been lucky. My mom and dad invested the money I made as a child. They didn't need it and they didn't take it. And I understand that there were families of child actors who needed it or who took it and didn't need it. But I do know people that happened to, and that is a sad story. And that's not my story. And when you say, the child actor things, my mind goes to the Kurt Russells and the Jodie Fosters and the Ron Howards and the Barry and Stanley Livingston and Angela and Veronica Cartwright. I mean, those guys never were a mess. Tony Dow, those guys were always grounded and talented and found their way. So I certainly know I know the laundry list names of sad child actors that had crashed and bad endings and sad endings. And I feel terrible for that. But not all of us fall into that category.
Thank God. Well, Bill, I want to read you something that you wrote in the book that really touched me. You said, and I'm quoting you here, I have no regrets about going into show business as a child. However, I have come to understand the difficulties that accompany that as one matures into adulthood and beyond. I've often strangely felt in competition with my younger self. And I've also recognized that over the many years, some people just can't help but be disappointed that I'm not a child anymore. I can't do anything about that, but it can be a bit unsettling. Well, Bill, I want you to know that your fans are really proud of the man and the artist and the human being that you grew up to be. I hope you know that.
I appreciate you saying that, and I it resonates with me. And yeah, I guess I know that. I mean, yeah. Thank you.
I know you're at that point in your life and career where you pick and choose pretty carefully which projects you want to get involved in. And I know you love working from home, but would you ever consider at this point in your life taking on a leading role or maybe a recurring role in a long running TV series?
Sure. I mean, I would consider everything, every opportunity I would consider.
Well, Bill, in our remaining moments, I want you to just sit back and listen to some of the highlights in your life. Just listen to this. You got to play Darren Stevens as a child on Bewitched, and Elizabeth Montgomery taught you how to do her famous nose twitch. You were the first American actor to receive an on screen kiss from Brigitte Bardot. You've performed on stage with the Beach Boys, America, John Sebastian of the Love and Spoonful, and Ringo Starr. You were extremely close friends with Rosemary Clooney, and she recorded 3 of your songs. Debbie Reynolds sang backup on a few of your songs. You got to sing and play with James Taylor and Carole King on a Jon Stewart album. You sang and played with Phil Everly of the Everly Brothers at his home. When Steven Spielberg came to see you on the set of the Twilight Zone movie, he told you that you had been a big influence on him as a child. And if all that weren't enough, you actually drank champagne from the Stanley Cup in your own house.
Yeah.
And Bill, I'm just scratching the surface. Are there times when you have to pinch yourself to believe the life you've had?
No, no, it's just the life I've had. It pinches me.
Well, I want to tell our viewers that you can learn more about Bill Mumy, order his books and his music by going to his official website, billmumy.com. You can also buy his book at ncpbooks.com and even get an autographed copy by going to that website. Well, Bill, I have only one more question for you. Are you ready?
Ready.
In 1965, you turned down the chance to see the Beatles at the Hollywood Bowl and to meet them backstage. What were you thinking?
I should send myself to the cornfield for that. I'm very blessed to be able to say that's one of my biggest regrets in life. Okay. So if one of my biggest regrets in life is that I chose to not go to the Hollywood Bowl,
you've done okay.
I've had a good life. the truth is, yes, Angela Cartwright and I were invited to the meet and greet and the Beatles show. I was very much a Beatles fan, but I was also a kind of a folky snob, listening to Bob Dylan and Pete Seeger and the Kingston Trio and stuff like that. And I remember saying to Angela, who wants to be around 15,000 screaming girls listening to yeah, 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 yeah? I very much remember saying that exact thing to her and saying, I'm going to stay home. And there's this wonderful photograph of all four of the Beatles sitting on stools. And Angela is walking, about to shake hands with, I think it's John. And George Harrison is kind of like looking at her from behind, like, and I know that I'm supposed to have been right behind her in that picture. And I'm not. But like you said, I got to play with Ringo, and that was pretty cool. That was fab.
Well, Mr. Bill Mumy, it's been an absolute joy and an honor meeting you and having this opportunity to interview you. Thank you for sharing your childhood with us. Thank you for your beautiful music, your performance as an actor. Thank you for taking the time to appear on our show.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's been quite an ego trip here for me. I mean, you've been very, very kind, and it's been fun to kind of surf through the old waves of the past with you.
Well, it's been a real honor. I just love you. I love what you stand for. I love the human being you have become as an adult. And I loved having you on the show. Our guest has been the wonderful actor, musician, and writer, Bill Mumy, whose new book, Danger, Will Robinson, The Full Mumy, a Memoir, is now available at ncpbooks.com, amazon.com, and wherever books are sold. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you to our producer, Steve Silver, my director of programming, Deborah Batsafin, my PR director, Laurie Towers, and my entire team at the XPTV1 network in the UK. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.